program where we had talked about what are the investment trends that VCs are looking at for this year. In continuation to that, we're talking about a very important part of the evaluation process, that is the exit potential for the businesses which are going or seeking investment, right? As you know, they are not long-term investors, they're there for 7 to 10 years at max. So what do they evaluate, how do they think about exits? We have almost all the names that you can think of from early stage investment fraternity in Mumbai, all of them are here. We have Rajan Mehra from Nirvana. He's a veteran as far as the investment world goes. Rehan, IAM as well as Orias Fund. He's an entrepreneur himself. He runs very successful flower delivery firm called Flora 2000. So he brings a very interesting perspective as an entrepreneur himself. We have Karthik Bloom. You would have one of the most prolific early stage investors. Last year they did maximum amount of early stage investments in India. Paula from Seed Fund. I guess everyone knows Seed Fund because of Seed Fund and also because of the Red Bus, right? Red Bus is a story of exit which not many ventures in India has seen the kind of scale. And Anand runs his own, as he calls it, a startup fund, because his fund itself is a startup. He's been an entrepreneur himself. He was part of Seed Fund earlier, and he's on the board of Time Mumbai as well. So I hand it over to Anand. Anand is going to be moderating this session. We'll keep this session for 1.5 hours. Feel free to ask questions in the video that we go ahead with.
Thanks, Nechan. I think I'll ask each of the moderators to introduce themselves briefly with each question that I direct to them. But before we start, I'd like to say exits are a very important part of this ecosystem. Whatever little ecosystem we have today is because of a few people who made money. And there is also a very interesting byproduct of the exit. Typically people make money, but then you also have a few people being added to the venture capital industry with every exit. Right? So typically either a moderate exit for a startup and entrepreneur goes on to become venture capitalist, or if angel investors get good exits, people like me and Karthik, and then we go on to become venture capitalists. Right? So exit is a very important part of the whole ecosystem. And given the condition of the economy, lack of IPOs, lack of M&As, no big buyers around. HP, IBM, Microsoft, Google, Facebook, none of these guys, Twitter, none of these guys are buying any companies in India, not yet. There is no culture of purchasing companies for talent, or purchasing companies for market access, or technology, or product. So India is a very challenging environment, and probably we have 1 or 2 notable exits every year at best in the ecosystem. So given this challenge that we have at the macro level, early stage investors, and all of us are early stage investors, we have our own perspective. Exit is still important, and like Kanchan very nicely passed a remark about our industry. We are not long-term investors. Right? It sort of feels bad to hear that we're not long-term investors, but how long-term can you be, right? I mean, in a country where stock market investment is supposed to be like for 6 months at best, right? They call it long-term. Trading, like short-term is like trading, buying tomorrow, selling today and buying tomorrow. But venture capital ideally would be very long-term. Right? And there have been situations where people have invested in stocks and passed on stocks to their investors. So VC funds are investors. And in many cases, companies like Yahoo and Google, VCs have passed on simply given the stock to their investors. Right? And so the overall position in the company remains for really very long term. But again, I mean, those are different economies and different situations. So whatever we read on the web about exits in the US Silicon Valley ecosystem, it doesn't necessarily apply here as it is. So to give a little bit of perspective about exit in other ecosystems, I'll start with Karthik from Bloom Ventures. Karthik, what is the difference? How do you compare the exit ecosystem in India versus in the Silicon Valley? I know you recently went there and had a nice trip there. We saw your tweets from there.
Try to promote India.
Yes.
Thanks, Anand. Thanks, Kanchal, for having this. I think it's difficult. I mean, now that I'm 2.5 years old, a little more than a startup, and it's hitting hard in terms of knowing that exits are still far away. The realization is that in the US context, I think the entire sort of venture industry was fundamentally built on a lot of IP creation, technology creation. So at least that's the sense I have. I might not have a full history of it, but if you look through the 70s, 80s, basically these were companies which eventually would get bought over by the IBMs and the Lotuses of the world in that generation. So you build great IP and then you beat somebody at it, and as the legend goes, Bill Gates was offered himself up for sale to IBM, and they turned it down at some point. They thought desktops would never come into play at all. So somebody has actually changed something on a paradigm basis of technology, and that has created a need for a company which doesn't understand it to buy them out and build that portfolio. So as the skill sets change, so another comment, I won't attribute it, very, very big Indian company CEO said, the minute the founding team left product, all innovation stopped. So it was very telling, and this is one of India's largest success stories in venture funding. And it's very telling that large companies are not necessarily very good at innovation. I mean, you might have Google, Apple, etc. as exceptions, but large companies are focused on building distribution behemoths and sales behemoths. So the joke that I hear from around Cisco, for example, is that Cisco, I think, is on the verge of its 200th acquisition in the last 20 years. So when I met them 6 months ago, they said 195 just happened last week. So basically, the joke is that Cisco is a sales organization. It's not an engineering or a technology organization anymore. You put anything through that pipeline and it will sell, because there's an army of people actually selling technology products at various levels to CIOs. So if you think about it, that culture of building IT product companies ground up and having that kind of scale just doesn't exist in India. We have a phenomenal software services success stories, but we don't have that product culture. It's very difficult to kind of retrofit it. And I know we're all talking about IT per se, but surprisingly, Anand, from what I hear from bankers and consultants and advisors, a lot of this has been happening in small scale manufacturing in the last decade. A lot of M&A. So I don't know your experience. So other than me, kind of waded through raising money from Indian entrepreneurs who made it big. And funnily enough, I think about 60-70% of my money has come from exited entrepreneurs.
Yeah, that's true. And many of them are non-tech sector.
Non-tech sector, predominantly non-tech, right? So the funny thing is that if you go into an operating entrepreneur, slight deviation, but if you go to an operating entrepreneur and say, give me money to manage, he'll say, how the hell can you do better than what I can do with my money? Right? Very simple. And and you can't argue against that. He's going to say, how can you deliver an ROI better than I can in my own business? It's finished, end of conversation. So you go out and then knock on the next door, and suddenly you realize the guy has just sold his company and is sitting on 50 or 100 crores of cash, managed by XYZ wealth manager. And ABC wealth managers also told him same ideas. So suddenly he looks at Anand and he says, "ठीक है, बंदा अच्छा लग रहा है, चोरी तो नहीं करेगा, चलो 1 crore दे दे." That's how we raised our fund. And those guys really don't know what to do with their money. They've never seen so much of a bank balance in their personal accounts, right? Because they kept building. They bootstrapped, they built, borrowed, equity, IPO, whatever, and they kept building. So for the first time when they're sitting on cash, so actually if you think about it, all these localized funds are being formed from exit entrepreneurs.
I think you're right, but the interesting part is that all of these exits that have happened recently on the non-tech sectors did not really have any institutional capital. not even angel capital, which is the interesting part of the story, right?
No, so which also points. So yesterday, you talked about yesterday's event being a dampener. There was a VC circle event yesterday. I think the mood was generally negative around the scale at which the problem exists. But the same point I made there, that historically we didn't have the need. I mean, if you went to an entrepreneur in the 90s, there's no venture capital. So we just bootstrapped, borrowed, had family connections, community connections. If it was a Madu, we went to Madu, community, etc., etc. That was friends, family, angel money for what it was worth. Worked the banking system. Got a hang of it over 4-5 years. Bootstrapped and built a business. And one fine day, somebody bought it. As you said, he probably owns 80-90% of the equity. So I know two of the guys who gave me money very intimately, in the sense that I helped one of them sell his companies. And these were 50-60 crore acquisitions. Right? 75-80% of it was bought. They have some residual stake. They made 40-50 crores. So it's beginning to happen where there are assets, hard assets and cash flow. The problem with our business is those are very difficult to define unless they've reached red bus levels or $100 million levels. And that, I think, is the big challenge in India. I don't know whether I strayed too much from your question, but yeah.
It's a very interesting perspective. I think good lay of the land as to where the challenges lie. I'll take the, try to, now that we have a little bit of background about where we stand in terms of exit, I'll take it to the latest exit in the fund space, Nirvana Ventures. And so how do you see, Rajan, how do you see your exits happening, right? I mean, I believe that your deal size will be typically a few $1 million at the most. And how do you see exits, what kind of exits you anticipate? Do you think that, will it be more of M&A, more of IPO, and have you built other potential exits like acqui-hires or buybacks, which we rarely talk about? Are they also part of your thinking, or are you just focusing on M&A and exits?
So I just set the context for the audience, because I think a lot of the folk on the panel may speak about IT, internet, mobile, and there may be entrepreneurs who are building businesses in other sectors. And we'll talk to the exit opportunities in other sectors, but a lot of our filters will be from the IT/internet world. So Nirvana is a fund that was set up in May 2011, and we have currently committed capital of $30 million. The fund size is going to be $75 million.
Okay.
When in this second close. So one of the questions that we had to deal with as a fund, which is
thanks. One of the challenges we had to deal with is we want to do early stage investments, but we want to have enough capital to support our companies as we make the journey towards an exit. Now, anyone who's done business in India knows, well, in most parts of the world, to build a business that is sizable enough to attract the conventional exit options, it takes time. In India, it takes more time. So if you see the companies in our space that have exited and are considered successes, you have Naukri, which took about 11 or 12 years to get to IPO. You take MakeMyTrip, similar duration. And a lot of these companies, Naukri was always profitable, but a lot of the companies that we fund do not make profits for many years. So I think the challenge is that how do you at once create an environment where people believe that you are building value without generating cash flow, and continue to attract capital that will be required for these companies. So, just to take a step back, so when we look at a company, we ask ourselves the question, can we think of this company being acquired by a global strategic who wants to come to India and value the company because of market access and being a leader in a space that the global player would want to come into? So for context, in 2000, I had a company called Vidobhai that I had set up in India, which got acquired by Baazi. And I became part of the Baazi management team. And the question we constantly had to grapple with was, we knew that it's going to take time for online marketplaces to become big in India. We had adequate capital, and we could build a company that would generate cash flow very quickly, or we could build a company that would be attractive for eBay to acquire. So we often debated what we wanted to do, but because we'd taken venture capital,
and our promise to the VCs was that we will give them an exit within a 5-6 year time frame. It was clear we had to build to get acquired. Whereas it turned out eBay was interested to come to India in 2004, and there was only one player in town, so to speak, and which is why they acquired Bazi. And the way they valued Bazi was not on the basis of the cash flows of the business or the revenues of the business, but on the basis of the fact that it's a market leader in a market that they valued could be $1 billion market. So given that experience, it's clear the first starting point for at least our fund is, can we find people that are building companies that global majors would look to acquire. I think just while on that point, I think it's important to highlight that it's not always possible to get there, right? Because sometimes it takes 7, 8, 10 years and your fund life is shorter than that. So the other thing that young funds like us do is we look for potential secondary buyers. That is people who are private equity funds. So a venture capital fund invests early. A private equity fund looks for an established business model, looks to have the business model risk taken out of the way, and is really looking that, the only risk is execution risk. So very often we look to position our companies such that private equity funds would be open to acquiring them.
That will typically be Series C, D.
That's correct, and they are happy to buy out the early investors and provide us the sort of returns that strategically.
So I think very clearly everybody would agree that an inbound acquisition from a foreign major would be one of the bigger exit opportunities for any VC from their perspective, right? Very rarely you come across companies like MakeMyTrip, which also, by the way, was indeed an acquisition target also, right? But they did go for an IPO. But Just Dial again, was also an acquisition target, went for an IPO. But mostly VCs will still be happier with the global major acquiring your company. Since we are talking about kind of acquisitions, I'll actually skip Paula because she's going to talk Redbus, most interesting. We'll hold on to her. And we'll move to Rehan. Rehan, this secondary exit thing, right? That's one very important thing that angels have played on, right, in the recent past. Not so successfully now, but in 2010 and 11, a lot of angel exits actually happened in Series A or B itself, right? So if you can talk about it, and why is it important from your perspective for the ecosystem?
Yeah, I think secondary exits they're extremely valuable. They provide liquidity to investors. It's interesting that secondary exits are available. So when we talk about investors not being able to get exits, there have been numerous case studies and cases of people having got those exits. I certainly have received a lot of secondary exits. I pulled out more than 2x of all the money I've invested via secondaries to date. The rest of it I haven't received any primary exits yet because my investing isn't that old. That takes time, as Rajan mentioned. So how do you sort of keep the cycle going? So you make secondaries. That's interesting. So I've had secondaries personally from both from larger funds which are in there, which is what Rajan mentioned as a huge target. But there have also been HNIs which have wanted to get into the game, which have bought secondaries from me personally. A couple of guys, maybe they exited and they have a large pool of capital, and some of these, either them personally, and I sold a couple of crores to them, and we remarketed a lot of secondaries within Indian Angel Network. That was a very interesting exercise on one of the deals. A whole lot of angels wanted to get out, other angels wanted to get in, so we sold. Angels bought from each other. We took special exemption from the VCs on the offer, and we undertook that transaction. Broadly, it all points to a pretty healthy sort of appetite for this asset class, and then maybe that's why you gentlemen have seen success in people wanting to participate in your funds. So I think that's very encouraging. And
Rehan, how sustainable is a Series A secondary, which some people might derogatorily call a flip, right? How sustainable is that as a strategy, right? Or is that something that you do as a strategy, or is that opportunistic? You came across something because you are an angel investor, you're happy to take 3x, 4x of your money out, and you're happy to recycle it, or is that as a part of a strategy? You plan on exiting at Series A, because you're sure that's very likely to happen? Is it opportunistic versus strategic?
It is strategic, though we don't exit at Series A. So when we come in as angel, we skip one round and sort of build value and exit at Series B. But we have a mentality of always be exiting.
Okay.
So in some of my companies that have gone to Series D and beyond, I've only 20% of what I originally bought. 80% we've taken out because you never know how these companies go. They go north, south, east, west.
Yeah, I mean, it is very surprising because typically with every series of money that the company raises, it actually the prospect actually degenerate instead of improving. And that's very typical to India, but I've seen that happening in India. So yeah.
So we do it very consciously, and it's helped in many cases. There was a company called Exclusively in which we made some exits because of this philosophy, and then after that the company, I think sold for undervalue or something like that. So it works out.
So especially in the case of Exclusively, for example, and in a few other cases, and I know one company where out of a $7 million round that a VC did, $5 million was for secondary purchase, and only $2 million was fresh money into the company. And that round happened 6 years ago. It's a 13-year-old company. The first VC got out after 7 years, and the next VC is now stuck for another 7 years almost. Right? And there is no exit, right? So and sadly, there is no exit for a $7 million investment, where out of which only $2 million went into the company. Right? So that's a very tough situation. So don't you think this will not last? VCs giving exit to Asian investors? You don't see.
Well, surprising to say that just this week I have a VC which is forcing us to make an exit, saying that I want to buy X amount. I don't want to do this deal, so you have to sell.
So VCs typically, I think PEs also do that because they have a certain deal size in mind and certain percentage holding in the company.
They don't want to dilute promoters, so I think that will perpetuate.
Right. That's actually, in a sense, you guys see it as a good thing for the angel investor.
Yes, I do see it for the smaller funds. I think the smaller funds, smaller investors can
But would you use that as a strategy to exit beyond Series B?
So it's tough to play it out as a strategy for funds, I think.
You'll be more opportunistic than that.
No. Also, I think, to put it crudely, you'll never position it as a sell side, right? So basically institutions who are coming in will look at us as one potential credible partner to keep along for the rest of the journey.
It'll be tough for you to justify why you're going to get out.
Correct. Why we're getting out, and then if you show too much eagerness, you won't get great value as well in mind. So that's the reality.
So, and I completely agree. I think that's one compulsion that institutional investors will face compared to angel investors, which is perfectly fine. The game is known.
Just to add that to the stat, Mumbai Angels, where I still am a member, I think has 8 or 9 exits, and all are secondaries to VCs.
Oh, okay.
All are secondaries to VCs. So basically, VCs do look to buy for all those state targets and etc.
So Paula actually comes from Seed Fund, and one of the very few funds which is sort of completed one cycle and is almost close to returning one fund fully, more or less, right? So Paula, what has been your experience in the last 7 years? How does it stack up? Like, how many companies where you didn't recover any money versus how many companies you had good exits, and how many companies where the good, bad, and the ugly part where you're stuck, right? I mean, the companies are okay, but not really going anywhere. How does it stack up?
Yeah, so now that at Seed Fund we've sort of we're no longer we're no longer the early babes in the woods. We have seen the life cycle. To be very honest, when we looked at Red Bus, it was very early, and we really didn't do the math on the exit. Similar to all other early stage, at that point, the ecosystem was also different. There was not so much talk of exits because we were aware of the fact that we need to get exits from all the companies that we look at. I think the focus at that point for all the companies when we came in was to build a category leader, and we really didn't have an idea of how the exits would pan out. We focused very heavily on getting the execution to a level where you would go to the potential of the market and become the category leader. And along the way, we started thinking, who would get what kind of exit and so on. Like Karthik said, maybe things are a little different now. The ecosystem has evolved. So at this stage, we may look at things differently. We may have some idea of exits which are even possible. We really didn't have very many benchmarks to go with at that time. So in the portfolio when we started, every company that we invested in, we thought it's a great market potential. We were primarily focused on companies which would make an impact in India. So the primary market, the primary growth would come from within India. And again, like Rajan pointed out, I think somewhere in the back of our mind, we had an idea that somebody would want to acquire us for the kind of market access, this huge market that we have if you're a market leader. So we went along with that thesis with most companies. And as you saw, that's how it played out in Redpass's case, or even in Carvalho's case, where we had larger players who wanted access to this large market. It would fit in with the whole global scenario that they were trying to build. So we did start getting feelers for a couple of these companies which were becoming leaders. Now the key is, like Anand was saying, you have to figure out the time versus the valuation kind of a thing. You want to have first enough capital in the company for it to accelerate at the right pace. You can postpone capital and then slow your growth. Eventually your valuation will suffer. So one has to play this very well on figuring out how the dilution is going to work. The founders also have to understand that I may have to pay a price to get in money in the beginning, not at the great valuation, but for a greater exit eventually. So the founder as well as the early stage investors, angels and VCs, have to be really tightly synced on this concept. And you have to wait for the end game. So I think as you saw in Redpass's case, we built a very large, the market was good, the execution was very focused on getting the, becoming the leader. We did get some, infuse some capital in between as well, but the big game came, at its own time. So I think time is a very important factor. Karthik mentioned about the Silicon Valley. I've worked there and studied there and so on. And I have several friends who got exits within 18 months. Very quick, because simply there is no cash flow, there is no this thing because of the IP. Now we are very aware that we are not in that game. We understand, that is the ecosystem in that part of the world. We are not yet in that part of the world, so we are very aware of what we need to do to get that kind of an exit. If we push them to get an exit in 18 months because we want to have a great IRR, that's really not how it's going to work. But we want to work along with the ecosystem that is here, and I think that's what we did with all our companies. And there were some companies who struggled. They were not able to attract the kind of capital or leadership in the interim stage, and they've given us very okay returns. And a couple of them, Carvalho, Redpass, some of them executed very quickly and efficiently on the capital, and that was the key to getting a good exit.
I'll come back later about the bad exit, the ugly exit part. But it'd be good to ask both Rajan and Paula about how do you. Rajan was a part of one company which actually exited to eBay, Carvalho and Redpass, right? What kind of preparation? When do you start that? Right? How do you prepare for it into a global major? And when do you start thinking? Do you start thinking from the day you invest, or do you start thinking of 2 years before you plan an exit? How do you start? What all things do you do? Rather, if you start.
Happy to start.
Yeah.
So I think the most important thing, I would be honest, is we start when we look to invest in a company. And what I mean by that is the entrepreneur is the reason people will buy the company. The entrepreneur, the team. And what we look for is a team that we call a learning team. That is, all of us continue to learn on a daily basis. And as long as the entrepreneur and the team has the ability to continuously pick up stuff, has a hygiene level of hygiene, that's an important part of certain decision making flow. I think the second factor that's really important is that in addition to the entrepreneur, has he built a team that is a scalable team. And again, this starts very early in the life cycle of a company, because good people like to get better people to work for them. And if the person has the ability to attract a great team, that's an important part of why a global strategic will look at sort of buying into a company. The other thing then goes to the notion of the business design. Very often you can start out building a company and in the business that we are in,
the business design should be, as we call it, have high operating leverage. So if you start throwing a lot of cost behind every marginal unit of revenue you generate, then this is the problem, because very often when American companies will evaluate it or European companies will evaluate it, they will look at the metrics they are measured by on Wall Street, and those measures of metrics typically have a ratio of revenue to per employee cost, so on and so forth. Now here there's a bit of a trade-off. You cannot not deliver value to the customer just because your business design. So let me take a step back. Am I first delivering customer delight? If the answer to that is yes, if the business model is changing, can the team articulate why this is important in the Indian context? So a lot of it is around communication. And the last thing that we do is very early, we start engaging with, like as I think Karthik outlined, we'll start speaking with global strategics in the space, let them know that we've invested in a company, and if they were to look to enter India, what would they look for in that company, and see if we can get some of those metrics introduced very early in the process.
So I think thanks, Arjun. Great summary. To follow up, specifically in Carvale and RedBus, right? What was the thinking? Because these companies are well known by everybody. What was the thinking? What kind of senior management changes happened in business model changes, if any? Was there extra push on building a brand or thought leadership? What were the things, specific steps that were taken as examples?
So both of them were very young. The teams were young, the markets were young. So when we first started, there was a lot of hand-holding. I think, like Rajan said, I think the reason we bet on them first was the team. They were very receptive. And yes, we really had to push them to think beyond just technology and beyond just getting a sale. So, I think we understood that there is a lot of potential, but the brand had to be built. So yes, there was a lot of focus on that. The team was very good to start with, but it was not enough. And again, it was, one always knows that we have to build the team, but it's the speed at which you do it. Otherwise, you miss the window of opportunity. In both Carvale as well as RedBus, I think the entrepreneurs were very conscious of the fact that while they keep delivering, on a plan, they have to do a lot of other work which may not reflect on the balance sheet, like making sure that Carvale as a brand consistently delivers a certain kind of message, certain kind of customer experience, and that went a long way. Eventually, when it was evaluated, that actually attracted a lot of people to them. There were other players in the market that helped them become a leader, but also sent out a strong message that we know where we are going. And that is very important when you're looking at a strategic. It shows that there's a path charted out for a company like this to go global, maybe. Very similar in case of RedBus as well. Whatever the weaknesses were, they understood that they had to augment it with getting teams. I must say very senior teams came later because these are very early stage companies. So initially the founders did a lot. But quickly when we saw that we were coming on the hockey stick, they were very proactive. Funny particularly, as well as Mohit, they were very proactive in getting people who were better than them. So it is not easy. I mean, I think all of us have seen entrepreneurs who resist this, and I think the companies in our own portfolio, where the founders have resisted getting teams of people who may be sort of so-called smarter than them or maybe more intimidated, they have sort of stepped back. You have to have an entrepreneur who is willing to accept and let it build and let that talent percolate. So I think that really helped us in both the cases. Because initial founding team was good. They also built on it. And we also focused on not just the cash flows or the revenue targets. There were other targets set constantly. How you are doing the marketing, how is the brand being positioned, how are you reaching, when you set up a distribution network, what kind of relationships are you building? Is it short term or is it long term? Those things, and you need again a team which is going to be receptive to this kind of feedback. Again, our portfolio companies which were quite adamant about the business models and didn't change, they did lag behind, and some of them went ahead faster.
A few Silicon Valley firms especially have some kind of corporate development teams where they will go and talk to corporate buyers, right? So was there any kind of activity around Redbus and Carvale where you started talking to, like Rajan said, you start talking to potential buyers 2 years before you plan an exit? Because exit, I believe, was in this case was driven by the fact that Seed Fund is nearing a particular term, and then there is everybody else who also sort of reaching what the desired exit levels were. So was it like a 1 year, 2 year kind of exercise that was planned around exits, or?
Well, particularly in case of Redbus, I think it was not just driven by the fact that Seed Fund was coming to this thing. I think Redbus was at a stage when it was already attracting a lot of attention because of the scale that it had reached. So I think a lot of activity was happening in terms of getting investor and strategic interests for getting into Redbus. So to that extent, I think for the last couple of years we did have a lot of movement around that. At some point, of course, we did decide that let's see what's happening. But it wasn't very strongly, like it is done in Silicon Valley. We did have to have a very big sort of a parade to go and check it out. I think Carvale also happened early enough that we really didn't have to. But yes, I think ideally there wouldn't be anything wrong if one did identify people who would, go around and actually scout and get you the best deal. I think that should be part of the ecosystem, right? Certainly it would work.
Before I go to the bad exits where nobody makes money, right? There is a certain class of investments where you put money into the company as angels or as early stage investors. The company starts becoming profitable, reaches 10, 20 crores of revenue, sometimes only 4, 5 crores of revenue, is profitable but has no buyer. Either is there a buyer or is there a next level investor where the company can grow bigger to be attractive to a buyer. And for Karthik and Rehan, you might, as angels or early stage investors, might have come across companies where they sort of reach some stage and stagnate. Right? You don't write them off, but you don't put in more money as well. But you don't know what to do with this company because one problem we have in India is equity hires are very few, and there is no salvage value. Right? Typically, if you run a company, you run it profitably, but if there is no salvage value. So if you shut it off, you actually don't recover what you invested. Right? So you're stuck with these companies. So have you come across any such companies, and how would you deal with these situations? We've all actually come across plenty in the market.
Yeah, there are plenty.
We have to have. So Karthik actually is one of the boldest investors, and I will have a lion's share of these as well. So it's also a question of time, right? What seemed like a great business. Today there are e-commerce companies which are breaking even, which are profitable, right? And we all know a few of those, right? Which are very nice businesses actually. And there is no taker, there is no investor. They are like probably $1 million, $2 million kind of revenue kind of companies, and there is no taker. And so is this a passing phase that these companies look ugly, or is it that like you write them off as ugly?
So it's a tough one. Too early, though there seem like there will be a few. It's too early to say for the fund per se. Combination of being an angel investor before the fund, and now that gives me about visibility in 5 years, as opposed to 2.5 years. So across the 5 years, there have been enough of those cases, and it's a combination of various things. Like you said, being a number 2 or a number 3 in this country is also sometimes a curse. The number 1 gets VC funded, everybody says, "Oh, ho gaya funding, sector mein ho gaya." So they already are in that, because also it's a relatively thin venture ecosystem. Right? So it's not like there are 50 institutions and they say there's room to build 2 or 3 great companies, especially when it comes to niches. Right? So and in macro sector like e-com, that played out well for whoever. In the sense that everybody chased everything possible for about a year, and so there was a lot of funding, but not that same game isn't necessarily played out in the niches. So somebody says that seems like a tough market. The guy has got $3-4 million, and I have a conspiracy theory that sometimes the funding announcements are deliberately larger to scare away the scare away the number 2s and number 3s. So it's possible, right? So basically, I think that's one big reason they don't go anywhere. Second is, as you said, I think it's easier to kill. If I could find a way to sort of kill the companies quicker, I think it's better than letting them survive, because they're a drain on just bandwidth. So as an angel, it's a mental write-off, right? So because it's your money. So this phrase I picked up in the Valley was what we manage is OPM, also other people's money, opium. So so basically we are investing OPM, right? So and that's a dangerous place where you're doing this 24/7, and some company which is not anywhere close to delivering any value to you is sucking out time from you, right? And we have spent disproportionate amount of time on such companies already. I did it for learning, and I need to learn faster and faster and faster to ensure that I spend lesser and lesser time with such companies, and which is cruel, because you have to kill it in some sense, or you have to mentally write it off. Right? And so that's a harsh call, but we've begun to make some of those in our portfolio, and some of them are gritty. They're like, this is our livelihood, we'll survive for a little longer, we'll build it. I say, best of luck, keep building. But I can't go and, showcase them to VCs or spend, quality 1 hour, 1 day sessions with these guys. That's not going to happen. So it's kind of seems cruel, but that's the only way early stage funds can survive, where you're making these decisions very, very fast on where to focus on, where not to. And in some sense, that's kind of what we've followed, not just in the letter of the thing, but in spirit as well. So that's why we've done a lot of smaller check investments, de-risked with other angels. So we co-invest because we don't know these outcomes for sure sometimes. Right? So if you're the only guy who's put the money, even if it's 50 lakhs, you're the only guy they can turn to. So it just feels like you're morally, emotionally, and financially bound to these guys. It's much tougher.
So Rehan, have you come across such cases where the company starts earning a stable revenue but doesn't go anywhere? And how do you handle it as angels? Is there a buyback kind of an exit plan, or?
Yeah, we have one such case currently. Very good company. I mean, the guy is making a lot of money. He's in fact. Yeah, we have one such case right now. I won't name the company, of course, but the company is growing well. In fact, it's growing about 15-20% month on month. Cash positive, a lot of cash in the bank, but there doesn't seem to be a space that's attracting VCs and other potential buyers at this stage. And we've often grappled at the board as to what we as investors should do. Should we be patient and wait for a strategy to come in another 2-3 years? It's been about 3-4 years since we made the investment. Or should we ask for some kind of a buyback? But luckily, I haven't had the experience of too many such cases. So this is the first time we're grappling with such a case. There have been a couple of companies which we are not in such a happy position with, and now that I have this fund going, we have disciplined NAV reporting system within it. So then we have a set of criteria by which we write off, hold at cost, upgrade, that we have to follow. And there are some few companies which do follow that. But we were analyzing, the team and I were analyzing exits in the last between 2004 and 2012. And we noticed that 30% of exits actually VC exits, at least media reported that we could collect, were either secondaries or promoter buybacks. 30%, right? So
across sectors.
Well, in our kind of sectors, the kind of ones that we all dabble in, relevant to us, tech, ITES type of thing. I'm guessing those 16% of that 30% was promoter buyback. I'm guessing that was probably at very poor value. I don't think there was a lot of upside in that, but and I'm not sure what the legal position currently with the put option is. There are conflicting reports, but I believe Nishit recently circulated a mail which showed there was a judgment which went positively in favor of the investor exercising the put. So I'm not sure of the latest position on that, but it seems to be an important 30% of secondaries, and this thing seems to be something we as investors need to be very sort of aware of, build clauses for, and think through.
So now
Sorry, I just want to jump in. I just to present a contra point of view. I think there's lots of entrepreneurs who have great businesses that are not suitable for venture funding. And I think that the wrong message we'd be sending is it's not a good idea to build cash flow businesses that grow healthily and sort of. It's just that the color of money that you should then be taking is different. There are high net worth individuals who are happy to fund businesses that generate cash flow early. And I think that's an important distinction you need to draw between sort of what is being discussed here versus what is generally good for your business. And I think where it comes from is this: the exit options available to us are IPO, strategic sale, or sale to another secondary sale to a fund who's looking for an IPO or strategic sale. If your business is not likely to be suitable for that within a 5 to 7 year time frame, you may find people who are happy to get dividend payouts and potentially buy back shares from you at a later date. But that's likely to be some of the folk you'll find in the angel networks who you'll have to pick up as HNIs, and you'll have to discuss that as part of the structuring of the document. So that's just a
I think
If actually also, I can also jump in, even in our own portfolio. Also, when we meet entrepreneurs and we sort of reject, people for venture funding, this is actually one of the main reasons that we say we can't do the deal. Though it's a good business, sometimes it's not sort of communicated well enough to the entrepreneur. Why is this not, why am I not getting funding? But, we have to make a sort of a judgment on a 5-7 year scenario for an exit in the particular sector, the particular stage of the company and so on. And that is one of the reasons, where the VC funding is not great so far in this country, is exactly what he said, that they are not, all the companies are not built yet for exits. In our own portfolio, like Anand knows, we have some companies who are doing well, but we are not able to exit, neither are they able to, go forward and scale further. You're kind of, you're stuck. We are not interested in the dividend, to come back to us, so then the whole buyback issue comes or so on. But they stagnate, so it's neither fun for the promoter or the investor. So these are, so when you take investment or when we invest, this marriage has to be very clearly thought out. Of course, it's not always that it pans out, the way you sort of envisage it in the beginning.
Rajan talked about some legal, safeguards. Rehan talked about some legal safeguards about, some clauses in the agreement to save. But I think most likely you're saying that we should avoid those kind of situations, with a large pool, rather than say, okay, anyways, my agreement will protect me with some kind of buyback or put option on the shares that I'm buying, right? So rather avoid entirely.
Yeah, we'd rather completely. I mean, we are not in the business.
So another part of so the last leg of exit discussion before we open up for questions is about how do we deal with bad companies, where the whole thing hasn't panned out. You introduce the product in the market, nobody is buying. Maybe there is some value. You thought you will have an e-commerce portal for something, and consumers are not interested, or the market leader is also expanded into that category and is killing you, or you thought that government is a market or overseas is a market, but you're not seeing the entire economics is not working out. So, or in some cases you've proven a point, but you're not getting follow-on funding, and without a few $1 million of follow-on funding, this is a non-starter, and you reach that point, especially after the first 250K from angels. So, what do you do? How do you deal with these companies? And, what are the situations for, how would you, for each one of you, how would you advise the entrepreneur to say, try to return some of the money, or try to go back and get a good job, facilitate a good job to the entrepreneur, or some kind of strategy, So, is it like VCs take active interest in setting these, to release bandwidth? Plus to safeguard whatever money is there in the bank. So, starting with Paula.
Sure, so I think we've done, in various cases, we've done one of each probably. Usually, when you, both founder and the investor sort of agree that this is really not going anywhere for whatever reason, either it's the product is bombed or you need a lot more money or it's the wrong timing. I think if the founder and investor are on the same page on it, then jointly one can find solution. And by that, VCs, it's in their interest to, for their resume as well, to make sure that the company is sort of salvaged to the best extent possible. It means either doing a down and selling it to another strategic, may not give you the value that you have valued it at. So you sell whatever money you can get back. You make sure the entrepreneur gets something out of it, either continuity with the strategic or a recent exit out, so he can follow his own. So he's not tied down. We try to facilitate a good transition either way. Sometimes when it gets ugly, when there is a great amount of antagonism because the founder doesn't want to shut down or has other ideas, the VC has various recourses. One can take over the company, everything, all the assets. You can actually execute what is on the MOUs. I think everybody tries to avoid it. In some cases, it does go down to that level. So you have to be aware that this is an option. It is a legal document that I have signed, and the VC does have certain rights on liquidation and so on, and they can exercise it. So that also happens. By and large, you want to make sure that the company, whatever it is, either it's a market access or the product somehow gets propagated somewhere. It is possible in many business models in India because a lot of the kind of sectors we are in, there are a lot of new nascent companies who may take it for a good value. So which is a good thing. So at least it's not killed totally. And in some cases you have to kill completely. Like Rehan said, there are promoters who want to raise money from other angels and HNIs and buy back. As personally in seed fund and VCs, we support it. I mean, it's not that we do want, we also recognize we have a time limit. So we try to make the most of it by that.
Are there any examples of investments where this company written out? How did it go about?
So that cycle has started. I mean, as somebody told me in the business, the bad news will come first. So the bad news has started, right? So you will have the first guys. The bad news simply is because you've built business models which are not sustainable and can't pay salaries after 1.5 to 2 years, because that's all you funded them. And at that point, you can postpone the pain by everyone struggling through it, or you can just call it quits and move on. So couple of situations where that's begun to happen. In one case, we let the employees, founders basically kept the shell entity alive for various regulatory and potential sale things. There were suitors. We saw it coming 6 months in advance. So we shopped it around and we thought we'd at least sell whatever tech was built. And in the classic Indian tradition, they kept dwindling. And then one of them took them to the altar and then said, I didn't bring the ring. So the marriage didn't happen. So we basically had to let it go. I mean, it was reached a point where there was like a month of salary in the bank account, and that was it, right? So you have situations where I think that's why I said I think. By the way, there have been believe it or not, we've spent way too much time on that particular asset. There have been 10 inquiries about buying that asset after that. No, it's there. It's hold, right? So you can buy it if you want. It's a platform. It looks cool, whatever. So the negotiations they keep whittling you down to see whether they can buy it for 5 lakhs or 10 lakhs. That's India, right? So the conversation starts at 50 and then ends at 5 or 10. So to us, I think as an early stage investor, maybe we're just being too idealistic. The idea was to see whether we had built something of value. So it didn't look like, to us and to the investors that we just did some crappy stuff for 18 months and then, we just shut down companies. But on the other hand, that's a necessary action. So we did that. The other case, it's not done, so touch wood, it'll happen. But similar situation, we'll hopefully get some money for the asset, but it'll come in stock. In a company, we had to understand afresh because we didn't know, we hadn't invested in that company, and it's not like a rockstar company.
So the exit form of the stock of another company?
Another company which is also at $2-3 million kind of value. It's not like a big established startup either. That would be nice, but that hasn't happened yet. And in the other case, the promoters at it, bridging it with whatever little they can. There's an example of that in Mumbai Angels, there's an example of that in Bloom. And we basically said, they're hustling. They're still putting 20-30.
In that situation where the promoter is hustling, right? But there is an overhang of liquidation preference of the initial amount that you put. So when the promoter
Is hustling with the company, right, and is trying to salvage some value from the company, but let's say the investor have put 2 crore rupees in the beginning, and that money now the investors have a liquidation preference of 2 crore rupees, but the promoter knows that I can salvage probably 1 crore rupees, maximum 2 crore rupees, but all that 2 crore will go to the investors, right?
So-
So how do you work it out like,
So-
to incentivize the promoter?
I don't know about you, but we quite mean as investors in the sense that we still write 50-page legal agreements, right? To get put in a crore.
Yeah.
So for what it's worth on a piece of paper, we have all the protections.
Yeah.
So our macro view on all clauses in legal agreements is it's just there to help you negotiate, right? So in a situation like that, fundamentally, the 2-3 things, right? You're not going to make your fund returns or even dent them by actually squeezing that out of the entrepreneur, right? So even in that situation where this discussion was happening for an M&A, we were ready to relinquish all of that to make the deal happen,
Okay.
right? Because the fact that they would have paid 5 crores, given 1 crore back to the investors, 50 to the angels, and then the others in some deferred payout to the promoters was good enough for us.
Got it.
It didn't matter that we needed a. So what I mean is all the legal clauses are enablers for us to sit across a table and say, let's make this work.
So you're saying that your 1x or 2x liquidation preference would just be a point of negotiation, and you're willing to re-incentivize the entrepreneur.
If there was a genuine attempt, right?
Understand.
So if somebody overpriced the asset, and that's when I'm tempted to keep the liquidation preference.
Right.
And he says, I have this wonderful idea, but I'm not. He manages to get somebody else, some rockstar angel, to put the money and says 10 crore ka value there.
Mhm.
And I don't see it necessarily, but I want to give it a shot. I'll stick to the liquid pref.
Oh.
Right? Because then he can't sell it at 5 crores and say, sorry boss, you'll only get your crore back, I'll make 4.
Right.
So because he's established that valuation, it does not mean that he's created value.
Right.
So it's a case by case thing. All of these, whether it's put options or buybacks, etc. I mean, put option very valuable for private equity. In venture, जो पैसा ही नहीं है वो उससे क्या लोगे?
Yeah, that's good.
What do you exercise? You can't take his home, right? So that's the point.
So Dhiren, your views on the same topic about what is in it for the entrepreneur, right? When all the chips are down, the entrepreneur can better go back to his 50 lakh rupee annual job, or sometimes even more, or go back to better things, and where the cost of opportunity for the entrepreneur is much higher, and he knows that all I will do now is probably recover the money of my angel, if fully or partly, right? So how do you view this situation, and if you come across some examples, what did you do?
See, Anand, as someone who's been an entrepreneur myself for over 20 years, in fact, I never worked in a company. I started, my from straight out of college itself. Pretty emotionally, understand. I get what the entrepreneurs go through, and we sort of get their pain, and we can't just take a cold hard view at it. And when we invest in these companies, we work very closely with them. Out of the 15 investments that I've led, we've only had this situation in one. And in that, what we did was we were very, before our needs, which are of course important, but what is very important is that we found these people a good home. So we kind of worked on that, and we placed we were very aware of the salaries, this is the livelihood. So we made sure that we placed it with another company. We didn't end up making, any money, but we placed the brand, we placed the entrepreneur, and we placed the team with another firm, from someone that we knew very well, a very large established firm. So that has typically been our approach, and we kind of understand that in this game there's a very high amount of emotional quotient that kind of goes into building these businesses.
And you also do it because you do not want an entrepreneur to have a bad experience with you as an investor, and it spoils what you stand for in the ecosystem. So
yeah, I mean that's the externality of it.
Yeah, because again, it's a tough job even for an investor to work for a zero exit, right, and still keep investing time and energy, right?
It's all part of the game. It's all part of the game. You have to allocate a certain amount of time to that. You can't just allocate to the good stuff and not to the stuff that's not so good.
I just want to jump in. Yeah, I think it's a very important point. I think the role of a VC is not simply the exit. I think that would be limiting what a VC is really in this ecosystem for. It's really to, because the more the ecosystem grows, the more the VC has to gain. So I think this is a very important point of figuring out how the relationship with the...
Contrary to what Kanchan will have everybody believe, VCs are also emotional and passionate people. So, there's a very high level of involvement. In fact, most of us as investors would know a lot of the senior management within the teams that we fund in, and we sort of end up giving personal assurance to some of these people to say, don't worry, we'll take care of it, and we indeed feel like doing that in the end. So Rajan, any experience with you? I'm sure very young portfolio.
Yeah.
So you
So not from my existing portfolio, but we have some experience from my previous fund. So one of the first things, actually the hardest thing for an investor, the person on the deal, is to know when you're done. Because my partner in my old fund told me, it's very easy to go native on a deal. You start identifying yourself with that transaction. So that's very hard. So as an investor, the minute you know that this is not going anywhere, it's great if you can give some visibility around your own commitment to the company, such that you give time to the company to plan an orderly wind down. And you have a conversation with the entrepreneur on what is the best outcome for everyone around the table. At that stage, you can have two kinds of entrepreneurs. You can have an entrepreneur who sees life, objectively as you would see it, or at least what you consider objective. And then you have passionate entrepreneurs, and you need to be passionate to build a business, who feel somehow like a jilted lover. Okay, that's harder to deal with. I think the first kind is not hard, because as a fund, we model for losses, and so it's okay. We just want to make sure that someone's not taking advantage. I think to Karthik's point, that someone's not taking advantage of you, but making sure employees are paid, provident fund is paid, orderly wind down is done. That's something we think we're partners in trying to help. When someone is intransigent, that's a little harder. And while you want to maintain your position in the ecosystem, you also don't want to set out the wrong message that, listen, investors are patsies. So I think that one then needs work. And so we've had both those situations in our past fund. We've had a number of successful situations. But having seen those, I just think that all of us in the fund come from an operating background. As VCs, I think most of us have operating backgrounds. So we know what it is to be an entrepreneur, what it is to be on the operating side. We're sensitive to the needs of the entrepreneur. But most often we hope we find reciprocity from the other side.
So, Paula, are there any situations where, like you said, any situations where the entrepreneur is running a profitable company, again, I go back to the ugly category, and simply refuses to sell because he draws a good enough salary, is comfortable, he has a certain amount of social respect, right, and has no necessary reason to sell because whatever he expected to get from a start is already getting. Exit will actually make him unemployed, right? And you have to then think of a new life and all of that. So, do you face those kind of situations?
Yeah, we do. So we faced it in Clearstone, where I was prior to this. So Fund 1 of Clearstone was 1997. And till last year, we still had a couple of companies around. Now, what you do as a fund is you'll have to either distribute the shares of the company to the LPs, and they don't like that. Right? Or you have to continue to manage it for the LPs at a different cost. So it isn't a happy situation. The advantage was that fund was a 7x return to investors in 2 years. So I think investors are forgiving just because it was a great return. But on average, there's not much you can do because it becomes a lifestyle for the entrepreneur. And you have to try and see if you can get a secondary exit, you can get a buyback, but it's a case-by-case negotiation.
Yeah, I think in the previous fund, in Infinity particularly, there were cases. Post-2000, there were a lot of such companies. And it does become a stalemate. I mean, you are just kind of stuck. There is really no way out except to do distribution, which has happened. We've done it in a couple of cases, but it's not happy. I mean, it's not good for anybody. I'm hoping in C1 and 2 we don't have to do many of those. But some of this is inevitable mix that you get in a VC bag. So you kind of have to be ready for it and sort of account for it. But the best way forward is to really work with the entrepreneur to make him understand early on that this is the VC game and this is how it will happen. But Anand, you and I have tried to place some companies which were not going anywhere. So you try to do what we call a fast death. So early on you try to park them and move on, so they can go their way and the investors can. Doesn't always work out, but that should be the goal. You have to be alert about where the company is going, and some as early as possible. If you can figure that out, then drag them towards that. But you don't get stuck with stages, certainly.
For the benefit of the audience, where
Can't hear you.
yeah.
For the benefit of the audience, where VCs pay a lot of attention to exitability of the company as a criteria for investing. Right? And many times entrepreneurs are very confused about, I have a great business, great ROI, and I have a great market, and I'm going to grow so much and all of that. So why are you not investing? So are there any generalizations from the panel here? These are some of the companies where there might be a great business. I can name, for example, IT services or BPO or BPO. Where today there are not too many buyers. In fact, most of the people are actually wanting to sell some of these units to somebody else. Right? Very few aggregators left in the market. So are there any general categories or examples of companies where you feel that, okay, these are the companies, if you are in these spaces, don't even plan for a venture capital, right? Maybe when you really grow big, you could plan for a private equity pre-IPO kind of placement. But in the early stages, there is no point in planning for any examples of categories.
So I categorize it in such a way. I think venture capitalists look for businesses that have high gross margins, that have high growth, that require capital that cannot be funded by banks because there is no fixed asset, and typically VCs may be okay funding working capital, but they will ask the question, why are you not taking that from a bank? So businesses that are services businesses should not be spending a lot of money building scale without profitability. So those businesses I would categorize as not suitable for venture finance. I'd say businesses that are suitable for venture finance, anything that creates IP or things that create distribution which can build networks, and those networks need capital to get going. And I think someone said this, they have low salvage value, but if they break out, become very valuable. So at least as we look at it, those are some of the vectors that we look at.
Any examples there of things that you wouldn't want to? For example, I took a lot of pain just out of interest to explain to somebody why we can't invest in a company which builds television serials. Now it's a great business and you'll make a lot of money, right? And then they'll give an example of Balaji Telefilm, a listed company, very fair actually, right? I said, why don't you do one thing? You start with somebody else's help, take a bank loan, and when you are very close to your IPO, maybe a private equity investor will come in and invest, right? But at an early stage, we don't see that there is an acquisition potential, even if we remember Sri Adhikari films or Balaji Telefilms, we don't see an acquisition potential. We're not likely to have Disney come and buy a TV serial company in India, for example. So, and of course, not a very happy ending to that. I was called names. It's not just Kanchan who calls these names. so
We have a lot of them.
So, but any categories like that? Or any interesting anecdotes where you had to explain why not good for you?
Well, Amazon buying Flipkart is the biggest exit that never happened. So interesting, people should talk about it. I don't think I've seen Amazon buy a company in any country.
They
Have
bought
they-
in the US.
Yeah, but in the US, but have they ever entered a market? Have they ever? So I was always surprised when that was cited, because that has never been the behavior of that buyer. And the few that they bought in their markets has been adjacent categories or technology companies, but they've never used it as a market entry strategy. So I was very surprised that a number of VC friends and other people would even grade that as a potential buyer, right? So I think grading your buyers is very important as to how real and tangible is it, right? Somebody says, okay, Amazon's going to buy it. Has that been their behavior? So which are the people which have exhibited that behavior? I think you should be aware of that. Like you said, in telefilms, is there a lot of acquisitions happening? Is there that behavior that you're citing that as a potential? So I think you should map that out as an entrepreneur. That are these exits happening? Are they happening in my country? Not just that they're happening somewhere in the world. Are those guys going to enter India? Because there's also China and there are so many other places where the guy can maybe enter ahead of India. So I think grading that and mapping that out and rating it on a scale of 1 to 10 is very important. Then what valuations that those exits happened at. Is it very tangible? So maybe in India now you see InfoEdge is buying, and maybe you could go and talk to a few other guys. Times has said Satyam Gajwani has come out and said I'm going to buy. So we haven't done it yet, but so okay, so maybe I'll give that a 5 or 10 now. So I think we have to be very realistic about that. If you're going to go down the IPO route, have you spoken to a bunch of merchant bankers, or is it just hawa mein hai ke IPO ho jayega? So I think we have to be very realistic about these kind of things. And as entrepreneurs, I typically ask them to do that exercise and come back so people get their own answers.
And you would expect the entrepreneur to be ready with some of these answers, at least to some pointers around this when they meet you.
Right.
So Karthik, any anecdotes where somebody said, I'll sell this to Google, right? I'll build a technology company, and or anything like that around areas.
Yes, you get those claims, obviously, that somebody could buy them. And it's not unreasonable given how crazy that ecosystem is in the valley to dream about it. So it's okay to dream. So I've had a classmate who I met him one summer. He said, so in the valley, just as a crazy other anecdote. I said, so what are you doing? So he said, I just sold the company. So what company? I thought you were in technology crossover ventures, which is where I used to work. So no, he took a break. He was tired of venture for some time, and then his wife comes up with an idea a day supposedly. So they decided to chase one, and then within 2 months they got an offer to be bought. They said, this must be crazy. I mean, why would anyone buy us? So they kept building. 6 months the same offer came and bought. It was guilt, by the way. It wasn't a small acquisition, right?
So he was guilt?
No, the acquirer was guilt. And so, he was chilling at home. His wife had to do the handover for 6 months. So he was sitting in his house. So you can envisage those situations, but in India you'll be fooling yourself. Right? I don't think people make stupid statements like that anymore. They're at least gone through one cycle of pitching. Somebody would have given them a rap on the numbers. But I'll give you an example since you asked about. So interestingly, the Barking Deer, the brew pub they were pitched to us. So half the investors in Barking Deer are my LPs.
Oh, okay.
So no. So I moved them there. So basically, I told them I'll introduce you to a few people. You pitch and figure it out.
Yeah.
I like you. I like your energy. How often does an American from Vermont come and set up a bar in Bombay? Right? And he's been at it like a dog for like 2 years. Rather like a deer. But basically, he's just been at it, right? So even today, he doesn't have his brewing license, but he's just been at it, and that's I take pride in saying I at least sensed that in him and said I wouldn't mind recommending him to my LPs. But that's not a venture fundable business. So niche F&B, niche retail. I will start a cute sort of pet grooming store in Infantry Road, and it'll grow, but that can be easily bootstrapped. Salon, some of them have been venture funded, but I'm saying they're the worst kind of business for early stage guys like us. Because वो venture guy mood में नहीं है तो कोई नहीं fund कर सकता इसको, and then you don't have an exit on that, and to make money on cash flow and all is challenging. The other example has been mobile games. A lot of guys come with cool ideas. They have like 1 hit, 2 hit wonder potential. We're looking at them and saying, "Iska hoga kya?" So
exit value for the company.
Yeah. So interesting anecdote to top of that mobile game example. So I don't know whether I'm supposed to disclose it, so I won't tell the name. So one venture fund told me that their venture partners in China looked at the space and decided that this is not fund backable. So they took permission and created a small sidecar fund, just amongst the partners, to do mobile games because it was so hot. Right? You don't want to pass on the opportunity when you're seeing them every day. So they invested in about 8 or 10 from like literally a $2-3 million pots, right? On average, that portfolio is given back 4x on dividends. But it's not a fund. It's not a fund investable business. So do understand that if you get 1 hit, just as like a BitRhymes did. And what does it become? Something Bingo Bash, Bash Gaming. BitRhymes is this Bangalore company which developed a bingo game, Tombola, Lotto, all the variants of the name, and built it for iPhones, iPads, etc. And Tandem picked them up in the US. I didn't know Tandem was the investor recently. So Tandem is this mobile incubation company which put like a little 200, 250K check in it. All the money they raised in their life is that, the 200K. And they think, I don't know what their year ending is, but apart from the technicality, they closed their last year at $54 million in revenue. So it's a phenomenal story where two of the founders are in the valley, one is here. Tandem groomed them there. The game just became viral and just kept growing, And I think they hardly have any expenses on this thing. It's a massive machine. So.
No, very valid point, and you hinted at that, Karthik, about exits being in US, and hence entrepreneurs and VCs both migrating, sort of trying to export our exit obligations to the Silicon Valley, right? And maybe Paula can talk a little bit about what you're seeing. Especially Nexus has been one leading fund. Now a few other funds are also trying to emulate a strategy of saying that, okay, can we find companies here, and export them to the Silicon Valley, or even better, just go to Silicon Valley, find company there, fund in there. So why say
one of my peers doing this.
But that's not of interest because we are here. But Paula, what do you think about this trend of finding companies here, exporting them because that's a better executable market, and what drives that decision?
I think clearly for certain products and particularly certain tech IP-based things, the market is there. I mean, you have to have proximity to the users, right? And if the market is there, you should move there. Now, as a VC, you must have that ability to give the right input and the right amount of money. It takes a lot of money to take the company in the valley, and you must have the right understanding and context. But well, it's a great export out of India if one can do it. It's not so easy though. One must really structure the whole thing and understand what is really going to work there. When you make the product here, it's not the easiest thing in the world. You must have cross-border presence in some sense or the other to be able to do that, and the quantum of money required is certainly going to be large.
Have there been any companies in the portfolio currently that you wish were actually shifting to Valley, right? And were you planning that they shift to Valley soon enough? Are there any companies?
Yeah, we have one technology products, software products company, which really I think they've done well here, but really for the big growth to come, the market is it's not just in the Valley, but even at least Europe, the Western markets. So there is something that we feel that we should work at it now to somehow maybe get a strategic investor in and then position it to go abroad.
You've been associated with some of these companies where the founders have shifted to. If you can talk about it.
Yeah, so we did this in Dhruva, and I completely agree with the strategy of going to where the market is. My own company, Flora 2000, which I founded in 2004 for gifting. Actually, for people in America who send flowers overseas, and not to India. It's really the Christian diasporas that do a lot of floral gifting. So in 2004, when I set it up, there was no market in India, so I focused a lot on building out the US market. And in fact, when that company's exit comes, it will be to a US company. It is a US business. It's run in dollars. It's incorporated in Gibraltar. We just sort of run it here from here. We never set up something on the ground in America because of taxes and a lot of local taxes. So we run a commuter model from here. I'll catch the Air India direct flight every 4 weeks and go there for a couple of weeks and sort of build that out. Dhruva is one of our companies that we did this to. We rehoused the company to Singapore. The management team moved to Silicon Valley. Our latest round of fundraising has now happened at in Silicon Valley. We've had a lot of team over there. Most of our revenue comes from the US market. So we're doing that in a number of companies. We emanate one of our companies, Dixie, into interesting, it's a kind of a roundabout thing, exited it into a Silicon Valley company which is actually focused on emerging markets back here. But because the technology was relevant there. So I think in the software business, you're going to get global exits. And I think for us as funds, it's a good thing. It also reduces the India country risk. from things happening over here. So for us, it's an active thing. We move these companies there. We've just done that in another fund. We've started working with other investors in America to help that migration process. I think it's a valuable process. I'm not kicked about the idea of sourcing deals from there though, because that's not our core competence. Because we are big boys in this small pond. I don't know about vice versa.
So, Rehan, how important is it for especially for the purpose of exit? Right? As you've been running Quora from India, right? But a lot of people say that, and while a lot of other people have been able to run software companies right out of India, but people still say that if you want a good exit, the founder should move to the valley. How relevant is that? I mean, Rajan, you can also take that part. I mean, why is it important to shift to the valley when you've been successfully running the business just out of India? So is it important for the sake of only for the exit to
So I think the answer is different if you're a company selling into the enterprise or your company selling to the consumer. And most successful enterprise companies need to have a local presence in the US because that's likely to be 50% of any global market. So it makes sense to have people there. Your sales teams need to be there. It's best that the CEO is closest to the sales team. So that's a simple answer. If you're a SaaS company serving a global audience, it's a little more complex. You can start out in India, but the reason you want to go to the US is the best user experience people are available there. And very often, to build teams, to have distributed teams doing development, you can have development done here, but user experience, product marketing, you're the best talent in the valley. So that's why people say, listen, if your company has potential, it's addressing global audiences, it's best that you rehouse to the valley. And I think there's merit in that. So it extends beyond just the exit story. I think that's where the talent is.
So, if the panel has any other comments which you've been holding on, or else we'll go to Q&A. Guys, any questions? Yes.
So, hi, this is Sudarshan here. I've been running an enterprise gamification company, software product company for 9 months now. Our first product got out. Very interesting to hear perspectives. 2 questions, right? First is, I think you briefly touched about, you evaluating businesses from a point of a strategic buyer overseas coming to India. But one thing, I get that we didn't talk about IPO because of the duration, but it wasn't touched upon if it is possible for an Indian major to buy a software product company and take it to the global audience. Is that a factor, or is that a case similar to Amazon where you've not seen enough? So that's the first question I
it's
had.
not just, of course we've not seen enough occur, but the mindset is very clear. Right? Like every other company, even the Indian IT companies are buying only access, to only wherever extremely necessary, right? So only in certain pockets like Japan, for example, or Europe, for example, where it's very difficult to build business from grounds up, is where the IT companies are buying market access or client roster. But otherwise, we've not seen any behavior or any indication about buying companies, and taking them. I don't think that the IT majors of this country are in any position to sell technology to anybody. Nobody will buy technology from them, first of all. So that's the conundrum, right? These are body shops, and they'll remain so. So it's not going to change very soon.
So since yesterday there was Ravi Gururaj, who's ex-Citrix, now he's also an angel investor. He was in the audience when I said something to this tune, and he got a little upset because I referenced a particular NASSCOM event, which I think he helped put together. So to give credit back to that event, about 3 weeks ago, it got some ET coverage as well. So it got all the PR. So there's a big difference between statements and events. And with that caveat, I'll put the positive spin on it. NASSCOM is desperately trying to invite all these companies, get them into a room as a formal event, and have 8 or 10 enterprise software companies pitch to them. And basically say, this is the quality of companies that exist, and you may or may not have stated explicitly that you have an intent, but all these guys are beginning to express intent. At some point, I don't know, I think that's a disaster, it didn't go anywhere, but take Mahindra said they're putting together a fund. Infosys just announced while they were bringing Murthy in that they're going to put $100 million aside to do product acquisitions. So whether it's desperation, whether it is stock market gimmickry, or whether it's a huge cultural overhaul they have to bring, they have to innovate. I mean, their model is going Somebody told me the margins are down to like 6-7%, 8%. You know, so you can't operate like a, I mean, literally sweatshop just may, you know, pasina bhi nikal raha hai.
Yeah, I want to weigh in because I think we're at this very interesting position where software services companies are considered mature in India. The market would like to see product come out of them, but they measure them on the basis of cash flow and earnings. So the Indian markets, unfortunately, will only look at the financials, which are the value of the company. Now, if you're building a product company, I was speaking with someone from Infosys, and they have a group that is only product and platforms. Okay. The problem is that group's revenues don't move the needle. So from a resource allocation standpoint, a management bandwidth standpoint, it's just not been able to get enough attention. Now they recognize if they don't do it 5 years from today, 8 years from today, they'll be extinct. Or in any event, they won't be relevant players. So I think there is this desire to move. The incentive structure has not been put in place. I think people have started getting the acts together. So to answer your question, yes, they will start acquiring Indian businesses. I think we have a second problem, that Indians are actually very hard on other Indians, okay, when they're acquiring. So I think someone mentioned it, they start getting beat up on some IP. So if someone does not have enough cash being generated, people will look to have a distress acquisition. Now in IP you can't do that, right? You're hiring the talent, you want them to be rewarded. So when Google, which comes from a climate of capital surplus, is hiring someone, they won't hesitate to pay $300 million to hire a team with no revenues. When an Indian company is hiring someone, they'll ask you, what are your revenues? So I think that mindset and culture change will take some time, but it's inevitable and will happen.
So for now, I mean, just to add from my personal experience, IT majors are likely to call you to demonstrate their IP, and they'll want to pilot IP only to copy it. Right?
Yes.
So it's very clear. Paula will second me on that. Their only intention in calling for IP, which NASSCOM will happily facilitate for them, is to copy. I mean, this is sort of what the behavior has been of many of the tech majors, sadly so. And I think culturally, a very strong product company wouldn't even want to sell out an IT major in India. Right? That's not their aspiration at all. Why would they want it, right? Because there is no cultural match, no fit at all of any sort, right?
I don't think a good product company from the Valley or anywhere would really want, or even in India, they would look at going to somebody else in the Valley, a much smaller company, but which values the product. I mean, Rajan pointed very bluntly that we are the IT industry is really it's a very cash-driven industry. There is really it's really not, the technology is out of it. So I don't think that one should add this as
manufacturing exits that Karthik mentioned are typically MNC manufacturing units acquiring other Indian manufacturing units, right, including pharma and others. But Indian entrepreneur acquiring other Indian entrepreneur is like sort of culturally we're not there.
It's sad, but it's true.
They'll acquire land, property, and all of that, but not.
No, I think put it even more bluntly. I think if an Indian entrepreneur has built a lot of value, he's somewhat self-conscious of how he's built it, which is not very cleanly. So how the hell will he trust someone else to build it better than him? So if you have 10 years of history of finished, you can't expect that guy to be a buyer. It's as simple as that.
I have an anecdote here. Yeah. In a SaaS company, early stage, one of the IT services company shown strong interest in acquiring. The only reason we didn't even, and they put out upfront a good valuation. The only reason why we didn't even talk to them further was the thought that we have to work for 2 years in that company with debt. I won't go out and sell. I'd rather close down the company than go out and sell. I can't really work for that company, period. So that's something which
you work for that company for 2 years, then you work for a VC. That can't be any worse. So yes. So I raise a hand, but I come to you.
Good evening. My name is Pavitra Balvik. I run an NBFC from Pune, but all you guys are like tech heavy. But I had a question perspective. Like, what does the whole VC feel about the NBFC space that does social entrepreneurship for financial inclusion that is geared towards productive purposes, not consumption purposes? So what's the whole outlook on that sector?
See, the way all of our funds are set up, right? Most of us have mandates, And typically, NBFC and financial services kind of businesses, there are restrictions from RBI itself, one, and two, many of us have restrictions on those kind of businesses from our LPs, our investors. So, it's not really in a position to take a view. I mean, it doesn't really have.
So I'll just weigh in. Omidyar Network has a fund which is focused on what they call triple bottom line, which is conscious towards this. They want to make money, they want to have impact on the community and I think the environment. Funds such as that those will evaluate opportunities such as this. What they may not do, I think, to Anand's point, is investment in an NBFC, because for a foreign fund to invest in an NBFC requires a minimum threshold of equity that they need to bring in, and they're not structured as such. So only private equity shops do that, and sort of it's above $50 million. So the scale is very different.
Okay, second part of my question is like, is there like a particular number that VCs look for if you're going to make that investment, that you want at least 15% or 25% of the company? Is there like a thumb rule that you guys look for?
Typically, the thumb rule is north of 25% for a Series A investor, and at least 20-25%. For an early stage investors, it's anywhere between 15 to 20%. Or it's for the whole round. Each investor, if there are two investors, they might split that round. But typical round size is at least 20% in the first round, seed round, and at least 25% in the Series A. Ballpark. Very rarely, it's like 15% of equity in Series A is very rare. But 25 is more the ballpark. Maybe it goes to 30, 35 also.
Okay.
North of 20.
I just want to say something in your first part of your question. We as a fund have identified NBFC as an investment area, so we have a special allocation for that.
Okay, great. I should come and talk to you.
With permission, with a lot of headbutting with our LPs. And taking, because we pre-identified it. No, there is so we are a domestic fund. So the domestic component has been specially set aside.
Yeah, I have a question that at the early stage especially, how do you actually do valuation of a company? When you say I'll take 20% stake and I'll give you say 4 crores, but then both the parties have to agree on the valuation, right?
Yeah.
Only then the percentage makes sense.
So basically the VC starts from 100%, entrepreneur starts from 100%, then they negotiate, and whatever they agree is the valuation. If they don't agree, they walk away. So I think very subjective. I've given ballparks. Right? So typically a VC wouldn't want to take 50% equity or 70% equity in a company. So what they will do is typically they'll ask you to raise less money. I don't think it's worth that much. Typically the valuation is driven by exit potential. Right? What do you see as the next round valuation or eventual exit and all of that. So it's a very lengthy question. I think Kanchan runs a full workshop on this subject on how to value a startup. So, but broadly it's a thing subject to negotiation and there is nothing compulsory about it. So it's very flexible.
So my rule of thumb on this when you come and ask for valuation is basically you have a business plan, how much money do you require approximately to run that business plan, and how much of the company are you willing to give away, which is the other way to answer the question. Valuation is derived in my book. There's nothing called valuation. It's a derived number which comes from my ability to believe that you can reach the next milestone with 1 or 2 crores.
Okay.
But you're willing to dilute.
From the Gomolo then.
Thanks for the great discussion, all of you. I just want to ask you that when you look at all of your early stage investors, when you look at the companies, you will know that what kind of exit is possible for the companies that you're investing in. So do you set some kind of a 3-year, 5-year revenue forecast or revenue plan for these companies? Like if you're looking at some kind of exit, and if it's for a secondary exit or for IPO, is it like different? The kind of revenue number that you look at?
Yeah,
the only revenue number that I looked at recently is Red Bus number.
Right, no, I think you're right.
So for IPO, some of the numbers are clear. Right? So IPO typically in India would be more like at least a 2,000 to 5,000 crore market cap, which will basically mean let's say 1,000 crore to 2,000 crore revenue. It could be in companies like Make My Trip, the revenue could have been like more like 500 crores also. But that's the range of revenue at least. Right? So Educom revenue was 250, 300 crores, and they had an IPO of around 2,000 crore market cap. So that's the sort of ballpark range for revenue for IPO. For exit, you have to see who is going to buy, and are they going to buy for intellectual property, in which case revenue is less relevant, and are they going to buy for market access, in which case revenue is more relevant. If somebody is going to buy market access, then the company has to be at least as big as Red Bus, which moves the needle for NASPER.
if Redbus was a 50 crore revenue company, probably wouldn't have moved the needle much for Naspers, and they would have said, okay, I'll ask somebody to build it, or the regular model of hiring some people and building it. But any other thoughts, Karthik?
Encapsulates it.
Okay.
So how do you define early stage? Means it's very subjective, right? Is it idea? Is it business plan? Is it product prototype? Is it product in the market with the customers?
I'll take that. And I said this yesterday at VC Circle, and I keep explaining this. So we just want to shed some light on. I think it's very important for entrepreneurs to understand the different types of investors out there. Right? So you have incubators at the very you have your friends and family at the very first level, and you've got incubators. Then you'll have angels and seed funds. Then you'll have venture funds, and then you'll have sort of PE funds. And going to the right one at the right stage is very important. So if you're just an idea. I think it's very important that you put a little bit of your own capital, and you get some people who you know to believe in you. So that's your first level of validation, right? Those are the people that even if they don't fund you, then. So I think that's the first level of validation. Now the good news is there are a number of incubators out there in the country, which you can approach at that stage. Then once you have a little maturity from that, then you can probably approach a bunch of angels. You'll have to be close to revenue or early revenues in order for angels and seed funds to typically, fund you. Then once you have a certain amount of maturity, you've got 3-4 guys on your senior team, you can probably approach a VC for $2, $3, $4 million of funding. If everything has gone well. So that's how you should sort of look at it. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. Okay. Wonderful. If you can try to keep it more on the topic. Yeah. I'll give a chance to anyone, please. Yes.
Before I ask, I'll give a quick comment to the earlier question. My name is Rajat, and I am from an investment firm called LGT Venture Philanthropy. We are a impact investment. So we have decentralized investment in our NBFCs. So it's legally possible. I mean, there are certain instruments that you have to stick to. So it was a small comment, but my question is more regarding coming to this part of SMEs. So as our investment strategy, we typically do not invest in startups as such. We are more of an early stage growth investment firm, but we recently did this investment in one of the startups. So our main worry there was that if we invest a small amount at the seed round, and later if they are not able to sort of go follow funding, then we would be probably stuck with a, let's say, 3, 4, 5% stake. Finding an exit with such small single-digit stake may be very difficult. So I don't know if you guys come across these situations frequently, and how do you tackle these?
Finding exits with a small stake, you will have to wait till the company itself gets acquired or till the company does an IPO. So I don't think that even 20% stake, if you had, would necessarily help you get an exit, because nobody is interested in that. Doesn't give you any kind of strategic control, right? So typically investors keep a drag along right or those kind of rights.
If you keep for getting for liquidation event, that maybe
But there is a drag along right. So there's a drag along right typically that all VCs have. Even if you're a minority shareholder or a very small shareholding percentage, you will have a drag along right, where you ensure that the promoters will sell along with you, at least up to.
That's more of a, I would say, a backup scenario, not something.
No. That could be a main strategy, because that might be your only recourse, right? Because everybody would want control, at least 51% equity in a acquisition target. So the promoters have to sell that much at least. So any other questions? Okay.
What the panel thinks about SME IPO and the new angel secondary board for exit, and when the startups are pitching for that, can they pitch that even up to a 10 crore, 20 crore revenue level, I can exit through that?
That's a very good question, right? I mean, we've had a lot of talk about SME listing, NSE has come out with new norms, SEBI is trying to do a few things. What is the level of confidence amongst the VCs here on those forums for being relevant in the next 5 years for exits? What do you think, Ajay?
I think it's a good initiative, and I think it's important for the SMEs that are not funded by VCs. I think the problem is getting the VC community or the private equity community involved is that typically, at least from a VC standpoint, the check size that you'll have into a company that's successful will be at least $3, $4, $5 million. which means about 530 crores.
So you're expecting a large exit.
Yeah, and at least when you start modeling your residual ownership at exit, the size of outcomes that you need may not be suitable for the SME market. The other thing that concerns me is, are there enough market makers?
Enough liquidity.
Is there enough liquidity to be able to exit in SME market?
So because listing is not equal to exit, right? Somebody has to be able to sell all the shares to actually get an exit.
You need to have the market makers, investment
Yeah, so
bankers,
I
that
think,
is compulsory, right?
I
I
think
think that ecosystem is there.
No, but today saying that an SME exchange will happen and then exit will happen on that exchange is not good enough. I mean, that's too much of an if situation for a VC to build in.
It's probably more relevant for angel investors, especially like that restaurant example I took.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It becomes
Yes, probably.
a 3-restaurant chain.
Yeah.
Somebody wants to trade their shares, maybe somebody else will buy. The issue is, I think it's more geared towards HNI, family office kind of buyers. And I don't think anyone's educating them. There's no point educating us. Right? They have to be educated on the risks of those businesses and whether they want to hold a stake in that. Because they're the ones with liquidity and they're the ones with no exit horizon deadlines. So even if you buy yours, it's not. I don't think the buyers for our kind of selling would be there.
In fact, frankly, in some situations, like there was this greeting card company, right?
1, 2, 3 greetings.
1, 2, 3 greetings where Intel invested in them and they went for an IPO, very low market cap. Now there is no liquidity in that company, right? I mean, where is the exit going to come from? Theoretically, you will say, oh, Intel had an exit, right? If they really have an exit, they're still there. And the day they try to sell the 23% shareholding, the stock price will crash down, right? It's impossible to get out, right? Who's the buyer, right? So it's tough even on the mainstream bourses. So for liquidity on SME bourses will be really tough. Yes, sir. Yellow thread.
Essentially same question.
Oh, wonderful. Okay. Yes, sir.
Hi, I had a question that on the angel fund, so you have maximum amount that you want to invest, say up to 500K or 600K, so or up to $1 million. So essentially now, and in most cases, the companies if they're growing, then they will need a subsequent round. So when you make the investment first, is that do you plan out and talk out the disbursement schedule in terms of how much? And the second is, since we're talking of exits, so now in most cases, with the second round, do you actually then actively work from day one towards actually reaching a stage where the next round is coming?
Sure. Paula?
Yeah, so on your part, how do we look for the second round? We do. We actually chalk out where this money will take you. We work very closely on the money that you've given, at what stage you're going to reach, and we try to make the cash flow break even in our own money. So in case the second round doesn't come, the company shouldn't just languish, it shouldn't die out. One can always bridge, but the whole point is that you should be at a stage where you are cash flow break even. It's all in theory, so that whatever time it takes to get more money, new money in, the company doesn't lose momentum. But one has to be very, very alert on that issue. And we, as an early stage fund, we really put that discipline in, and we are really on their case for doing that.
So, I'll take one last question because I know everybody wants to pitch to Karthik and Rehan.
On that line,
I have to listen to you.
Leave them. Yeah.
On that line, like everyone in Valley is talking about Series A crunch. So do you also see Series A crunch here in India?
Yes. You can read the timeline of Karthik's tweets and
We just say they are not good enough deals.
Yeah. Yes, you had a question.
Yeah, does it happen that for an entrepreneur, when he gets the first round of funding from a VC, he thinks that's an exit? Because some of them might think that now that I've got money in my company, my lifestyle is better and all. So, and then the management might be upgrading. There is a board member.
They just need to have one board meeting with Karthik and they'll find out what kind of exit.
But I want to share an interesting case study. There was a company, and when I invested in that company, his office was in Okhla, in like this slum-like area. As soon as he got a Series A funding, straight moved into the Hyatt. I immediately made him sell my equity. Because you buy it at any price,
We keep a very tight watch on their salaries and
No, in fact,
where
that
they are
is
spending.
something
That's
that
something
is
we
in
do.
the business, not for him.
Absolutely.
Yeah, usually we kind of, 9 out of 10 times the salaries are capped, like fairly aggressive levels. If you're giving 1 crore, you can't have a founder taking away more than 9, 10, 12 lakhs at best. Giving 2 crores, maybe 15, but that's about it.
The investors will make sure that there's never a situation that life is comfortable and cozy for an entrepreneur. They'll keep him hungry like a lion until the cage is opened. So, okay guys, thanks a lot. Very good questions and thanks to the panel. Great comments and sharing a lot of insights.
Thanks, Arun.
I have
no, we are not going to give you awards. No checks either in this. Yeah. So I would. So on behalf of Time Mumbai, whenever any speaker comes in here, we make a small donation to a midday meal scheme. The ones which don't kill students. So we make such donations. So I have the letters to that effect that I would want to give it to them as a token of appreciation for taking out time and meeting here. They will be around. I think Paula has to leave, but everyone is going to be around for some time. You could possibly chat up with them. And I would also invite Laveen to talk about the boot camp that we are doing. Just 2 minutes on that, and possibly Anand, you might also add on that boot camp. Laveen. Hello.